So, question. Homework. Did you do it?
Impossible.
Were you able to sit in silence? Some people, of course. Where's Don? Don's not here today. Darn it, I was hoping to ask him. Anybody else want to answer that? What? What was the homework? Do it. It was in a moment of, was it the morning? I can't remember if it was the morning. I asked you to find, or no, any time of the day, I asked you to find some time where you could just listen. Right? Where you could just be silent, whether it be in your prayer time, instead of talking and praying, just sit to listen. After you reading your scriptures, to just sit and listen. On your way home from work, instead of listening to the radio or podcast or this, to just sit and listen. How was it? I heard you. It was impossible. Tell me why it was impossible.
I wrestle with it anyways. It's in prayer time, letting the confusion of the day, what either coming up or what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Allowing that to enter into my time with God.
Uh-huh.
And I'm going to seek forgiveness for that so often. I'm sorry for my distractions.
Mm.
So to sit, it's not that, the thoughts were bad, but in silence, to listen.
And remember, like I told you, I didn't want it to be like a Buddhist monk, like have to sit and quiet your mind completely, because that is nearly impossible. I mean, those monks go to monasteries for like 30 years until they can finally get to that point, right? But the question was, can you sit in silence without any other distractions and just, your mind's going to wrestle. It's going to run. Are you listening to what it's wrestling? Maybe it's thinking about work. Why am I worrying so much about work? Maybe direct your thoughts a little bit. Maybe listen to allow some of the other thoughts that are trying to break through the work questions to come through, to just listen. Or maybe to think about the verse you just read. Why is this sticking out to me? Why is this verse hitting me? And allow your mind to just wrestle and think.
I heard someone say, a teacher say that they had a habit of keeping a notebook next to them when they had silent time.
Mm-hmm.
And when things kept distracting them or something kept popping into their mind,
Mm-hmm.
they would just jot a phrase down and just sort of leave it on paper,
Mm-hmm.
sort of let it go, release it, and keep focusing on silence.
Yep.
But not to ignore those things.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We had a verse last week. I think we kind of broke down and gave some new words to it. And I kind of translated it myself a little bit so that basically everything that we talked about, just put it into words. When God began creating new things in my life, I was able to see and recognize the awe and the wonder. Remember, we talked about the tohu vavohu, this silence and this hum that was taking place. And out of this nothingness, this absolute nothingness, God created. In His creation and in my pausing, I had the opportunity to hear the voice in the silence, the thin silence we talked about. Rashi, this was the verse we talked about last week as well. Remember, he talked about in the beginning of the creation of the heavens and the earth, when the earth was desolate and void, and darkness was upon the face of the murmuring deep, and God's Spirit hovered over the face of the water, and God said, "Let there be light." Last week was all about the tohu vavohu, the hum and the silence. But today I wanted to look at 4 different words. This word face, that's repeated a couple times, and then darkness and light. And there was something about the face that stood out to me as I was going through this, and I learned this a while ago, and it's always kind of like struck me. The Hebrew word for face is panem. Gosh, where have I heard that before? I've heard panem before. And it like stood out like, I know that word that is used somewhere in a movie. Where have I heard Panem before? Oh, is it already on there? Dang it. I wasn't, no, you, a little quick. I was thinking of you when this came up because you and I had many conversations years ago about the Hunger Games. And you remember that? Like you were young. You were young. You were like barely starting at the coffee house when we were talking about this stuff. The Hunger Games. Has anybody not seen the Hunger Games except Walt? He's too old. You haven't seen the Hunger Games? Really? Where's Everly? Has Everly seen the Hunger Games? Oh, man. Great movie. The books are good. What was the name of the capital city? Panem. Right? Panem's the name of the capital city, which is interesting because what's this idea of Panem is face. We look at face, but it's in the Hebrew, it's not, remember, it's word picture. It's not necessarily what you see. Panem is what's inside. It's beyond the face. It's what you see through the eyes. Have you ever heard somebody say, like, I can see your soul through your eyes? You've heard that statement before? That's the idea of Panem, right? It's not just what I see on the face. It's what's behind the face. It's what's inside you that is Panem. And if we remember the Hunger Games, when they got to the capital city, what was Panem like? To them. And? Rich, fake, lavish. How did it make them feel? Out of place? Yeah, they were definitely out of place. But what was it? What would be another emotion of how they felt? Huh? Oppressed, angry, disgusted. Remember the party that they went to and they had hey, take this pill and you can vomit and eat more food. And they were just furious and disgusted. Where we come from, they don't even have food. It was this place of absolute darkness for them. It was disgusting. It was horrible. It was anger. It was all of these negative, terrible emotions to describe what's on the inside of Panem. It was bad. And so as I looked at the verse, I looked at, okay, let's look at darkness. What is darkness? And darkness is this Hebrew word hosek, which isn't just this idea of the absence of light. It's, in fact, if we look at Isaiah 45 up here, somebody read this for me. Isaiah 45. Somebody read that out if you can read. Oh, it's a little, you turn the lights down. Can you read that? Isaiah 45 verses 5 through 7. If you have a Bible. That's a little hard to read up there. Somebody read Isaiah 45, 5 through 7. It is, but it's hard to read. So if you can read that, go ahead. Read it out loud.
I am the Lord, and there is no else. There is no God beside me. I heard thee, though thou hast not that they may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is none beside me. I form the light and create darkness. I bring prosperity and create disaster. I, the Lord, do all things.
Great. I'm going to read 6 and 7 from my translation. Maybe you have a different translation too. So that they know from the rising of the sun and its setting that there is none but me. I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, and there is no one else. Forming light and creating darkness. Making peace and creating evil. I, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, do all these. Have you heard that before? Who creates darkness? Who creates evil? In the typical dualistic Western church world, right, we think good and evil is this cosmic battle between right and wrong and God and Satan, and evil was this over darkness thing. But if we understand the context of Genesis, and we understand who God is, and we understand exactly then what Isaiah is saying, God created all this. There's nothing that is outside of this creation that he didn't create. These were created. Darkness was created. And it was actually until God said, let there be light, that they were actually mixed together, that they were one. They were intermixed. At the beginning, God creates distinctions. He distinguishes between darkness and light. He distinguishes between humans and animals. He distinguishes between male and female, between land and water, between beautiful and ugly. He distinguishes between profane and holy. He distinguishes between life and death. And it's in the beginning that we learn that our primary tasks as human beings from these stories that we will see, that it's our role to preserve God's distinctions, which unfortunately our natural state as human beings is to not follow God's law, to not follow these distinctions, to undo the things that God has put in order, as we will see further on in Genesis. That's kind of our natural state. But the deeper we think about this idea, the more we realize that what does that mean that we are made up of both light and shade? What does that even look like? Now, from a psychological perspective, this always makes me think about these things, because as we see, there are distinctions that each and every one of us have in this perspective. From the light and the darkness, we have consciousness and we have what? Subconscious. Follow me here. Don't let me lose you here. We have distinctions between consciousness and subconscious. We have distinctions between awake and asleep. We have a distinction between work and we have a distinction between humility and, thank you. I don't want to say pride. Yes, pride. There's a distinction between the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer HaTov, the good inclination and the evil inclination. There are these distinctions that every one of us have in our life. And when we look at the dark side of the psychology that we have within us, what do we find? What is in the subconscious part of our brain that we see? Is that not where we have dreams? Is that not where we have these, where we just talked about silent moments, these silent premonitions? Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's the negative message that you still have in your life that's telling you that you're not good enough. Remember, 93% of communication is nonverbal. It's what we find in the subconscious, these feelings that we have that's receiving information constantly. It's never turning off, but I'm constantly receiving information. It's always running in the background. It's what guides that intuition that you have, that gut feeling that says, don't do that. But it's also those feelings that could tear you down as a negative message, or it's that feeling that can lift you up. And God says, this is who you can be. The light then is what? If that's the darkness, what's the light? The light is, my kids hate it when I say this, right? That front part of your brain, which is called what? The prefrontal cortex, right? It's the logic part of your brain that tells you, I don't know if you should do this. It's that linear thinking, like the step by step, let's do this and let's do this and then let's do this. It's the part of the brain that disseminates the feelings that we want to act upon, that asks the questions, should we be doing this? Are you sure that you want to go down this path? Are you sure that you want to be listening to your friends just because they say it's a good thing? Maybe you should be asking, maybe not. This idea isn't just from the text. This is a very ancient idea that covers the globe. In fact, the ancient Chinese mystics and philosophers also saw these distinctions in what they call the yin and the yang. Oh my gosh, that is terrible down there. I can't even read this. The yin and the yang, which is this idea of these opposite forces, but they are interconnected forces. They are two, but they are one. The yin receives and the yang activates. They saw this in all forms and all differences and changes in life. They saw it in winter and summer. They saw it in male and female. They saw it in order and disorder. They saw it in unity, but in duality. They understood that one cannot exist without the other. You have to have both of these things in your life to be one. And just like a quarter is 25 cents, it has two sides, but it's still one. And at the beginning of this nothingness, which you can't read down here, unfortunately, At the beginning of this nothingness and a God's humming, he began to create distinctions, separating light from darkness. Out of chaos, he created order. He created all of these things. And because he creates, no, not because, before he created anything, he separated. He separated these things, the light and the darkness. And because of that separation, we get to see the rest of creation ensue beautifully with these distinctions. And it made me think, how many people today struggle in our world because of a lack of distinctions? What do you mean by that? Are people today able to distinguish between their emotions? Are people able to distinguish between this is how I feel and logically this is what I should do about it? Or is this feeling even real? Do children have the ability to distinguish and regulate their emotions without getting angry and just throwing punches and fighting uninterruptedly? Because that's how they feel, so because I feel this way, I just have to let it out. In the book I was reading years ago that helped me study for this is the book called The Grammar of God. And the author in this book said, Genesis is the idea of what leads to what. Which I highlighted that and underlined it and went back to it several times in trying to figure out this idea of what leads to what. And in the next few passages after Genesis, we see what leads to what. God creates this and he says this and something happens. And he says this and something happens. And what leads to what. But if you continue to read the story of Genesis and you get to humanity, then you see what happens with the people who don't necessarily follow God's command. And what happens when they don't, what leads to what next. And we see trauma in people's lives that leads to further trauma in families' lives. I shared the story of my grandmother and that trauma that has kind of transpired through the years. And it made me think of another story that I'd heard years ago, maybe, gosh, it was 20, 30 years ago when I heard this story, but there was a guy in 1930s who lived in Indiana, grew up in Indiana, and he got his engineering degree and moved to Chicago after college, got with his engineering, was in this big firm, and I can't remember if it was an architecture firm or whatever, but he was an engineer for this firm. He had this girlfriend, and this girl dumped him when he moved to Chicago. Broke his heart. Went into a state of depression. So much so that he couldn't even get out of bed. So in the 30s, when you were going through depression and they didn't know how to necessarily handle depression, what would they do? They would lock you up. Not in jail. Where would they put you?
Sanitarium.
What?
Sanitarium.
Or psych ward, or I don't know what a sanitarium is, but yeah, something like that, like psych ward, right? They would send you to a psych ward and people would monitor you because why? You're crazy, right? And so this guy was in this psych ward and then at one point, kind of woke up out of his depression, I got to get out of here. I have to leave. And so he was on the third floor of this building and he had to get out. So what did he do? He took his sheets and he tied his sheets together and he created a rope, right? And he threw this rope out the third story window and he shimmied down. Oh, I don't even know if that would hold us, right? Could that hold you? Right? Oh, maybe I got it tight enough, right? I'm going to hold this, I'm going to tie this onto the bed, and I'm going to crawl out the window, I'm going to shimmy down as many sheets as I can to escape. And he did. He escaped, ran back somehow, I don't know how many miles back to Indiana, his brother's farm. He hid in the barn for weeks. 2 or 3 weeks he hid in the barn. It was eating the food from the animals, and then realized, okay, I can get on a train because I know that a train heads west. I might be able to get far enough away from here. So he did what they did in these old movies. What did he do? Train's going by, jumps in the train car, right? Climbs on, he gets in the thing, takes him all the way to California. California, he's like a new person. Finds himself a job, finds himself a woman, gets married. He's a carpenter. He starts building large construction stuff. He's free. His life has changed. He was crazy. At some point, people said, this guy's never going to get out of here. Let's lock him up in a psych ward. His name was Hugh Dorman, my grandfather, from my mother's side. Now you guys know why I'm so messed up, right? If we see life this way, what leads to what? Then we can ask, how many problems do we have today because of trauma? Anxiety, depression are off the charts, extremely high in children today. Children are struggling at all-time numbers. Why? What leads to what? Anxiety comes from that dark space, that feeling part of our brain. And if it's left unchecked and it's not in balance with the light part of our brain, it can consume everything. It can grow into a chaos, which is interesting because there's a neuroscience that I've been watching. I don't know if you've heard of Andrew Huberman. He's a neuroscience out of Stanford University. And he says, look, for most people that are struggling with depression, there's a simple fix. If someone is depressed, what they need to do is to get up early and get some light in their eyes and get some movement. You get a dopamine release early in the day. That's antidepressive. When the sun comes up, you should get up early and go out and look and allow the light to come in, which is interesting because as I was thinking about this later, I was remembering one of the disciplines we taught early on years ago was this idea that what would Jesus do early in the morning? He would wake up before all the other disciples and he would leave the house and he would go outside and what would he do? He would pray. For hours sometimes. But he would leave the house and he would go on a walk and he would sit before the rising sun and he would pray. I wonder how many people struggle because they don't get outside. They don't allow the sun to fill their eyes. They don't move in the morning. I wonder if our life was different, if we just made better choices and not just listened to the darkness, but asked the logical questions, what do I need to do? One of the first things that Ron Koval, you've heard us talk about him a few months ago, one of the counselors who helped start the gathering, start the counseling department. He taught me this early on. He said, Matt, there's so many people that are struggling with depression in this parish, and a lot of times has to do with the fact that they're struggling with personal chaos. And if I could just help them create order in their life, that chaos slowly starts to dissipate. And I said, well, how do you know if there's chaos in their life? He said, just go look in their car. Look in their bedroom, maybe. What does your car look like? He said, if you open up their car door and it's a disaster zone, right? That probably is a good sign that there's disorder in their life. And if there's disorder in their life, they're probably feeling a little anxious and anxiety throughout the day. If you walk into their bedroom and it's like, oh my God, a bomb went off. Like, how can you feel healthy when you live in absolute chaos and disaster? Is that a picture of your room or no? There's from Huberman to Jordan Peterson to the Admiral McGraven that talks about making your bed, clean your room. If you want to have order in your life, start with your own bedroom. People love to complain about all the things that are wrong and they have anxiousness and depression and they're mad because this person, that person. But what's your life like? Is your life in order? Is your room in order? Before we complain about everybody else that's around us, clean up your own house first, he says. Admiral Craven says, look, if you want to feel better at the very beginning of your day and then at the end of your day, make your bed the first thing in the morning. Because you're going to have problems at work. You're going to have problems with the kids. You're going to have problems. All these problems are going to happen. But when you come home, you're going to come home to a made bed that you made. There's these little things that help separate the light from the darkness. No.
Speaking from experience, very hard, messy house, messy everything. I mean, I don't know if this turns into like a family session or something, because they're crying over there. So I do see that, like, I'm less anxious when my house is like not a mess. It is really hard to keep up with that with like 2 little kids
Mm-hmm.
and the car.
Yeah.
And the husband who drives that car most of the time. So like I think I've appreciated, I've started to really appreciate like having my own space and being like clean. At the same time, like I got really obsessive with it. And in a clean house meant that like my life was in order.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that my mind and heart were.
Correct.
So seeing, you know, and like especially for like girls my age with young kids and married, it seemed like it was really interesting to have a clean house that looked correct all the time.
Right.
To where they're scared to like even show mess.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that like your mess is my mess, like that's what I want. That's why I'm like come around my house right now. It's a mess. Because I can't like cope with my anxiety and like heal myself if I'm trying to obsessively keep everything clean. Like, you know, a house is supposed to be like this.
Think about what you just said, right? Now, think about the distinctions between darkness and light. Think about the yin and the yang, right? There is a balance. You can, and this is where didn't know if I was going to get here or not, but this idea of like, if the darkness consumes everything, you know, that's a bad thing. But if the light consumes everything, what you just described, everything is spotless clean, and that's all that I'm doing, then you're out of balance as well. Something's missing, right? Which means from the light and the dark perspective, what we learned last week, if I'm constantly cleaning, where do I go back to the dark to listen to the thin silence? If I'm spending all this time cleaning, when do I have time to just sit in my silence and just listen? Because it's all about this focus. What is your perspective? And the question is, why? Why am I doing this? So yes, it is absolutely imperative that we recognize there's times to receive and times to activate. And there's this balance between the two. And once I'm out of this balance, right, I feel the tension, right? And that's in the Hebrew thought, there's no such thing as balance because there's one always pulling you to the other side. And you need that. You need to feel that pull because if I don't feel that pull, then I just fall off the deep end. That's great. It's a great point. And so how do I do this? How do I balance this idea of control and the things that I can't control in my life? What can I control? What can I act upon actually in my life? And this is where the idea of what are the things that I should be focusing on? Because so much that I found in so many people's lives is a lot of stress and anxiety also comes from the things that they cannot control. I worry about what Russ is doing or Walt's doing or why they're going to do this or, you know, all of these things that are happening all over the place that I have no control over, but I'm worried about it. And when I worry about that, it just sucks the life out of me. And so I have to recognize there are things that I can control, things that definitely matter in my life, and things that I can control, but I have to find that place that what is it that I should be focusing on right now? What are the things that I can do right now? Because there are things that are out of my control and things that are in my control. But what can I do right in this moment, right now? And stop worrying about all the other things that I can't control. Stop worrying about all the big things that are too big for me right now. What is the thing that I can just do right now? What is the priority that I should be taking care of? I need to be able to distinguish between these things. For some people, maybe you need more light in the morning. Instead of sleeping in, You know, get up a few minutes early. Go step outside. Take a walk. Allow the sun to hit you. And while you're walking, start praying, talking, or listening in that time. Or maybe people are just go, 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 and they're constantly working, and maybe those people need more sleep. Maybe you need to go into the darkness side and say, listen, I'm constantly working. I'm wearing myself out. I'm going to be dead here in a few years because I don't stop working. I need to listen to my body that says, break. If life is in chaos, maybe you need to start cleaning your room or your car. If what leads to what are you doing with your life to be what God created you to be? As I looked at this verse, I retranslated it on all the things that we've been trying to learn with the tohu vavohu, with bara and baro, with panem and with hosek in mind. And I thought, okay, how do I interpret this verse? Maybe you should ask the question, how would you interpret this verse, knowing what you know now? But for me, it was when God began creating new things in my life, I was able to see and recognize the awe and wonder of His creation. And in my pursuing, I had the opportunity to hear His voice in the silence. In the darkness, I am able to experience and feel His presence. In the light, I am able to act upon His desires. How do you read Genesis for you? And not in an eisegetical way like, hey, what do you think this means? I've taught you all the words that you need to know about this verse, but how does it impact your life personally? Not just back then, but today. What is God speaking to you today? And how is He creating new things in your life? How is He speaking to you? How are you distinguishing between the light and the dark in unison to make you who God created you to be? Let's pray. Father, we just thank you for an opportunity to just break down the depth of these words that you have given us. To understand that we are created uniquely with a purpose, and to understand the distinctions that you have created in our lives for our benefit. For our benefit so that we can glorify you. We pray, Father, that we can see these, that we can hear the tug of the light and the dark in our life. And that we can understand where we are lacking in our deficiencies and what we need that you can bring. Whether that be to be in the dark place where we can hear your voice, we can listen to your dreams, that we can see the dreams sometimes in the daytime, but that we can also ask the tough questions. What does this mean? What do I do next? What leads to what? We pray, Father, for your wisdom, that we can be a light that sometimes is missing in a dark place. And when a darkness overtakes an entire community, Father, we pray that we can be your light to bring balance back to this place. That your word can permeate through our pores and our mouth and penem, that people can see your character in us. And we praise your holy name. Amen. Questions before we get to the announcements? I'm sorry?
You know, I had some of the and figurative things.
Yeah, sure.
So, which raised another question about this. Creating the heavens and the earth, the planet, the solar. I never thought that was a literal thing.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at it as your eye.
Okay.
Is that what you were kind of into, or is that, or do you think it had a little thing creating this on the earth?
I think yes. I think it could be both. Yeah, I mean, clearly we know that the Big Bang Theory, like if we're just looking at science, like there was creation, something had to happen. You know, is the story of Genesis a literal account of how that all happened? I don't necessarily think 100% that is, no. But it doesn't mean that the things that God does share doesn't mean that they didn't somehow similarly happen or happen like that. Yes. So there is something to the creation of the world, and one of the distinctions I think we'll get to later is distinguishing between all the other pagan ways that the universe was created, you know, which these gods were fighting, and then the earth was created because one god died and his blood, you know, was poured out and the earth created, and all these other things. And God says, no, that's not how it is at all. So I think there's all of these different things and layers of that. I don't think the Genesis account is a literal, exactly this day and then this day, but there is a distinction and a process that this had to happen, for this to happen, for this to happen, for this to happen. Does that make sense? So there is a process. But I wouldn't say it's like exact 7 days, and I wouldn't say that the earth is only, 7,000 years old. Like, there's too much evidence to point to other things. Yes. So that's where you distinguish between the literal and the other. Yeah, good question. Anybody else? What? Fish eggs?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I've heard, I was just gonna make a comment. Clara, don't be too hard on yourself. To me, it's a Mary and Martha thing sometimes.
It's balanced.
And it used to, when Deb had 3 young kids, actually, I was there. She had 4 kids.
Before I joined in the party.
It used to drive me bananas how she could just sit down and look like the dishes weren't done, but all this stuff wasn't done. It's really hard for me to stop if something's not done.
Yeah.
And that used to drive me nuts, but I would also, when I took the time and calmed down, I would appreciate the fact that she could sit in the middle of, in my mind, what was chaos or clutter, and spend time watching a movie with her kids. After spending the day with them and all the craziness, it's like you're not done. You got to straighten all this up first. Then you can still. But I appreciate the fact that she was able to do that. I mean, that is definitely a big difference between she and I. And I aspire to be more that way.
Yeah.
Instead.
But maybe that's the distinctions that you both need. Right? I'm a very clutter drives me crazy. But Andrea, if there's any dust on the counter, like it drives her crazy, right? So the dishes have to be absolutely clean, the counters have to be absolutely clean. And so we're very different in that. So if we come together, we work together, like, and we cannot be neurotic about it, right? It's a good thing. But when we only have one side only, then it becomes tension. Correct. What were you gonna say, Alex?
Just something my wife started doing on the house along with this is, guys once he said, and kind of like God created light and darkness, and like that's kind of, I'm talking about like this inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about like darkness is compared to evilness, or evil, and my thought process is like humans weren't on earth would be any evil. Kind of, I don't know, like in my mind, like, probably not.
Right.
There's probably not any evil. The goal would be to figure out how to keep the darkness inside you, which is a weird thought. Like how to tame the evilness inside you so it doesn't get out.
Right. And that's the idea of the Yetzer Hara, right?
Yeah.
The evil inclination. We all have that inclination. It's not a bad thing. It's in you, but it's what you choose, right? Do you choose the evil? Do you choose the good? The Yetzer is the neutral part. And so if you have too much darkness in your life, you become evil, or you become depressed, or you become, all these bad things that can happen with too much darkness. But sometimes too much light is not a good thing either. So when we recognize that God is the creator of all this and he's put all this in action, like there's so many layers that you can apply it to. Yeah.